Chapter 1 The Dive by Edward McKeown. I hauled my sorry butt over to the new entranceway at the Hillsville Reservoir. It was just after midnight, but I'd run into construction on the Cross Bronx Expressway. I could see my dive of 18 of New York's smelliest local 1322 sewer workers assembled already in the pit area where arc lights held back the dark. Fortunately, Mendeleev, the chief of sewer operations, was also late. Thank God. I parked my Honda, got out and stretched, glad for the coolness of a late June evening, then picked up my work jacket and tool belt from the trunk, along with my hard hat. Some of my regulars lounged around on benches. JJ, a lean black man with a shaved head, gave me a casual nod. He sat apart from everyone, as usual. Everybody was warily respectful of JJ, not because he was a supervisor. JJ was union and a regular guy, nor because he was big either. At 6'2". I was bigger, and so was the Rastafarian we called Ganjamin. But there was something about JJ. People didn't screw with him. With one exception. As I walked up to JJ, another dive supervisor, a short Asian man who looked younger than his 50 years, came around a big breakfast wagon. He glared at JJ. "Hey, you lazy black bastard," he said in horribly broken English. JJ leaned back on the bench, crossed his yellow work boots. "Hey, Gook, you got my laundry?" Gook laughed like a madman and handed JJ a sack which contained a cup of coffee and the only food I've ever seen JJ eat, a bagel with egg and sausage. "Morning, JJ," I said. "Morning, Jung." "Why he never use my nickname?" Gook complained to JJ. "I think he stuck up. Don't like me." "Why people get all wound up about race?" JJ winked at Gook. "Watch this." JJ turned to me. "Hey, Kevin. Desegregation. School busing. Me dating your daughter." I made a face of mock horror and clutched my chest. "See?" JJ chuckled. "D.S. Hanlon." On hearing my title and name called by a familiar voice, I turned to see Tom Mendeleev, the project's chief engineer, waving me over. "Massa's voice," JJ teased. "It rough now, you being all the way at the top, district supervisor now. Won't be long till you be selling your soul to the devil and become real management." I rolled my eyes at him and headed over. Mendeleev was a handsome man of about 50, with a wide, easy smile and a friendly manner. Yet, for some reason, being near him sent the hairs up on the back of my neck. My Irish grandmother would have said there was a touch of the she about him, something unnatural. The same went for Sagella Wentworth, his deputy, a gorgeous black girl who should have been a model, and over whom I should be drooling. With her, too, I always picked up a sense of wrongness, as if something else lay beneath the perfect makeup and expert hair. She wore her long hair beaded and belled, and sounded like a wind chime when she moved. I shook myself out of spookum thoughts as I reached the pair. "Kevin," Mendeleev, who always made it a point to know everyone's first name, said. He stuck out a hand, and I made myself take it, hoping the hesitation didn't show. Sagella smiled her sharp whites over his shoulder, but, as usual, didn't speak. "Glad you're here to take care of this special assignment," he went on. "Last shift reported an odd echo in the rock walls near the low point of City Tunnel 3. They think there may be a large hollow space ahead. I had them shut down the mole until we can get a proper crew in there to see what's up. Have your dive do test bores and soundings. I'll be down with city geologist Edsel towards the end of the shift. It will have to be handled carefully. We don't dare undermine the tunnel. I don't have to tell you what problems a hidden river or a gas pocket would cause right there." I nodded. The guys are still spooked about those bodies the transit cops found in the lower access tunnels yesterday. Maybe the sounds are just somebody's imagination. "I'm sure," Mendeleev grimaced. "A couple of homeless show up dead, and next thing you know, we're hearing about albino alligators and other nonsense. I tried talking the Port Authority cops out of sending down a detail, but the mayor is freaking." I hadn't heard about the cops. "They're down there with their dogs and a team. Don't worry about it. We'll be down later to check on your progress." They both smiled. I tried not to shudder and turned back to my dive. Come on, you sewer rats. We headed for the big crane that dropped the elevator down the shaft. People lined up behind me. I saw JJ, Ganjaman, Gook, Mustache, Townie, and two guys we all called Ralphie and Norton. Maybe their wives or mothers remembered their real names, but to the rest of us, they were Ralphie and Norton. They'd complained about it for months, then copped an attitude. Norton now wore a vest and a goofy hat just like the TV character. There was also a big girl we called Asia, because she looked a little like the WWE wrestler Chyna. She grinned at me and winked, then picked up some heavy equipment and fell in beside me. We dated a few times, but it hadn't gone anywhere. She was too much of a fitness fanatic for me. Still, I liked her. Maybe if I could bench press another 50 pounds. Then I spotted Phil Galderon and groaned. Phil was the biggest pain in the butt in Local 1322. One of those guys who thought unions existed to protect him from work, as opposed to protecting him from management. Since he'd become a shop steward, he'd filed grievances on a weekly basis. I knew Mendeleev hated him, and I was surprised to see Phil on the detail. Phil's expression indicated my joy at seeing him was shared. "Ah, geez, the Shanty Irish has arrived. Good to see you too, you lazy shit," I returned. Phil walked to the back of the line, accompanied by his two asshole buddies, Tony and a guy we all called Orc, because he looked like one. The three muttered among themselves. I looked at their supervisor, Fat Sal, who shrugged and smiled. Sal was a good guy, but close to retirement, and he wasn't going to screw about with Phil. Great. The crane operator gave us his usual cheesy grin and his usual equally cheesy line. "Hey guys, ready to take the plunge? Hope you're all good with Jesus." The crane lowered 5 of us at a time on our railed platform down into the pit. There wasn't much to see. Metal and wood braced the shaftway. At the bottom, we walked out onto the concrete pad. I waited until the rest of the dive had been dropped, the last guy in to turn to the tunnel. Some wag had hung up a sign over the main access tunnel, "Gates of Hell. Abandon hope, all ye who enter here." Next to it, someone else had scrawled, "Have a nice day." We marched in, people shuffling, coughing, and adjusting their equipment. The tunnel sloped down at a mild angle. For now, the walking was easy. We trooped on in silence for the most part. My radio squawked. I stopped to fuss at the damn thing, and everyone else trooped past me. I thought I heard excited voices on the radio, but static obliterated the meaning. I screwed with the unit for a bit before realizing that the others had vanished. A clinking sound above me on the catwalk. I jerked my head up in surprise to see a man looking down on me. Something about him stilled the yell in my throat. A tall, lean white guy. He looked to be in his 50s, maybe a spry 60. He wore a black overcoat and a wide-brimmed hat. For a second, I wondered if he was a Hasidic Jew who'd gotten lost. He stared down at me with huge dark eyes that looked more than a little mad. Slowly, he drew a long-fingered, bony hand out of his coat pocket and raised a finger to his lips. "Shh. Who the hell are you?" I whispered back, then wondered why I was whispering. His voice was thin but penetrating, and I could hear him clearly. "Johnny I am and have been, but also other names have I." He giggled. The sound made me shiver. I put a hand on the rock hammer on my belt. His eyes glittered as they followed the movement. "Ah, Johnny sells and buys, because that's what Johnny does. Want to sell that?" He made a sudden, impossible leap across the catwalk and landed next to me, an easy 8 feet. "Yes, Johnny is interested in the things that you have. Things that may be needed elsewhere. Valueless to you, but important to poor Johnny, who must buy and sell." I gripped the rock hammer tightly. I was maybe 30 years younger than this clown, and a solid 6 foot and 200 pounds, but he was scaring me. I licked my lips. "Why would I want to buy from you? We got a Walmart only a few blocks over." Johnny cackled with a balletic twirl, his big hands flying out from his sides to full extension. "Why?" he asks. "Because Johnny always has what you need," I says. "Merchandise that can't be gotten elsewhere for any price.
Johnny is the salesman.
He said it as another man might say, the king. I don't need anything, but you, buddy, need to get out of this tunnel. It's a restricted area.
Johnny goes where he pleases. He is the salesman, now and forever.
He came closer. I held the hammer between us, ready to swing.
But Johnny sees that you don't know him and don't believe. You should remember the things your grandmother told you about Bogarts, brownies, and the she riding the winds.
I started. How did... Johnny raised a hand.
Johnny forgives you. He is a good salesman and knows you will need his merchandise. Johnny will give you valuable information for, say, that's a nice light you've got there.
The finest kind, bud. A Xenon Supermag. Johnny's grin grew into a frighteningly wide rictus. Utterly unnerved, I unclipped the mag light I always carry underground and placed it on the catwalk. Johnny swooped it up.
A sale,
he cackled.
You're a smart boy after all.
His demeanor changed, and he stooped over me. As I met his gaze, the tunnel around me faded, and I felt as if I was floating in air. A gray fog enveloped me. Then a few seconds later, images appeared below. With a shock, I realized I was floating over an immense stone city. A ghastly greenish light emanated from walls of the buildings, pallid and somehow unclean. A foul odor wafted from it. Foul, even by the standards of sewer workers. I drifted down, and then I saw them, and I frantically prayed to the Virgin that they did not see me. Things shuffled and lurched through the ghost-lit streets, hideous horned and tailed things. Some had green, leathery-looking skin, while others walked upright like men, yet had heads like alligators.
They see you not, Johnny whispered in my ears, because you are not. Long ago this place ended. Many of your kind died in its walls as a sacrifice, as food, as entertainment for these.
I whipped my head around and searched frantically for him, but he was invisible.
Dread Volkaya this was,
Johnny's theatrical whisper continued.
Once linked to your world, those that lived here feasted on your distant ancestors. Sometimes they did worse, mating with them to produce demonic half-breeds. Some humans they broke the souls of and made them into the Shadalka, servants of demons. The Shadalka seek to outdo their masters in cruelty because they are part human. They can cross more easily to your world.
A marketplace came into view below me. The joints and other meats hanging there looked all too human. I retched, for all that I could neither see nor feel my body.
Ancient days ago,
Johnny hissed,
elder gods and fallen angels roamed your world as well. Some helped the demons. Some slew them. Some,
a dry cackle punctuated his words,
watched and played, one such as I. Your ancestors were brave, priests and priestesses of lost gods, warriors of mighty arm. Always they fought, but there was a smart one who did more. He learned from the elder gods and demons. Smart was he, yes, and even traded with Johnny for things no other knew. He sealed dread Volkaya from your world for the means and the way he gave Johnny a great prize, the white pebble. Perfect it was, and so white, and Johnny loved it so. So Johnny sold him what he needed, and dread Volkaya and other worse places were sealed away.